Good morning. We're going to begin this hour with the very latest on the fiery crash yesterday that claimed dozens of lives in Moscow. Russian officials gave an update earlier this morning. They say they have no plans to ground the type of aircraft involved. This video, posted to social media, one of many on social media, captures just the terror, the horror passengers were experiencing as flames engulfed the Russian-made plane. This all happened as it was making an emergency landing at Moscow's main airport, just minutes after taking off. 41 people this morning confirmed as dying in the crash, and when you see this new video just released this morning by investigators, it is incredible to think more than 30 people survived. They scrambled to safety down those emergency chutes. Our Moscow correspondent Chris Brown has been reporting on this story since it happened, and he takes us this morning through the very latest on the investigation.
Well, we have seen, as you saw, some of the video of the aircraft. It is just a charred hulk. It's still sitting on just off one of the runways at Sheremetyevo Airport, just in the city's north, and that's been delaying operations there, in some cases by several hours for flights. So far, we know that investigators have found both black boxes, so they'll be able to get some answers from those. And everyone who was in the cockpit, all the flight crew, they all survived as well, so they'll be able to provide some answers. And of course, just from so many different angles, so much horrific yet unbelievable video of what happened on the runway yesterday. From the security camera, you can see the aircraft coming in very, very fast, it would seem, striking down, going back up into the air before touching down again, hitting actually the runway in the back of the tail part of the aircraft. That caused the fire, and it literally went down the runway in a fireball. From inside the plane, just horrific sounding video of people screaming for help, calling for their children, telling them to grab a hold of them. Other people, other passengers saying, wait, calm down, we're going to deploy those chutes. And you can tell from the outside video that the two front chutes were deployed, but we understand that, of course, the back chutes were never deployed. Russian TV is saying it doesn't appear many, if any, passengers in the back actually were able to get out alive. Until now, we may be starting to get some clearer answers on that death toll. As you say, 41 is the number, but really until now, Russian media accounts have been emphasizing the number of survivors in this, really trying to, it seems to me, make the best of a horrible situation. But again, included in that 41, at least some children and some teenagers. Heather.
Just a devastating story, Chris. And again, to come up to another part of this investigation, this was an Aeroflot plane, an Aeroflot Flight 1492. Tell us a little bit more about the particular model of plane that was flying, where it's used, anything particular about its background at all.
Well, this is a very important part of the story. This is a Sukhoi Superjet 100, carries about 100 passengers, usually on flights about 2 hours or so within Russia. And what's notable, it is the only Russian-built aircraft since Soviet times. Aeroflot's fleet is mostly Airbus and Boeing aircraft, but it has 50 of these Sukhoi aircraft. It's a prestige project for the Putin government, even though there have been ongoing concerns about performance and production. Nonetheless, given the political sensitivity of this, Russia's transportation minister was out today saying there are no plans to ground any of these planes, and for now, the Sukhoi Superjet will stay flying.
Doesn't matter how many times you see it, the video is harrowing. This is the scene yesterday at Moscow's main airport. Russia's investigators are today really digging into investigating the cause of that horrific crash. The Aeroflot Sukhoi Superjet 100 burst into a fireball as it made an emergency landing shortly after takeoff. 41 people died. We got the confirmed number this morning, but incredibly 33 survived. And what was the difference between life and death? Perhaps as simple as where the passengers and crew were located when that tragedy struck. That's one of the things we're going to talk about in the next few minutes with Larry Vance, a former pilot and TSB accident investigator. He is in Ottawa this morning and regular on our program. Mr. Vance, good to see you once again.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you, Heather.
There's some new information we got from Transport Ministry officials this morning in Russia. So let me put some of those questions to you, Mr. Vance. Number one, they said that Russia is not going to ground this plane, the Sukhoi Superjet 100. Does that seem like the right decision to you?
Well, I think it's a judgment call by them. I would be inclined to look very seriously at grounding that airplane unless they've figured out already what happened to it. If they have, and they can write off the fact that it's something that could happen to all the others in the fleet, I would be looking to ground it.
Because this is a plane that has had, as our Chris Brown was reporting, ongoing concerns about performance and production. It's not one that hasn't raised question marks before.
Yeah, it has a reasonable safety record. I think they've had a lot of teething problems with it as they brought it online and trying to support it. I don't know that it has a really bad safety record from an accident point of view, but this is a very serious event, and unless they get to the bottom of it really quickly and can determine, like I said, that this is not systemic to the fleet, they had better look pretty seriously at grounding it until they do figure that out.
They don't have a definitive cause yet, because that's something else we learned this morning from transport officials, and that is that they have the flight recorders, both of them, the flight data and the voice recorder, so that's good. But right now they're still just talking about three potential scenarios: mechanical failure, pilot inexperience, or weather. Based on what you've seen and read so far, does any of those seem more likely to you or more plausible?
Well, one thing I can tell you is that they know more than we do, and they'll release the information as they confirm it, as it becomes factual, and they can confirm it. But they do know more than we do. As far as what happened, this accident started. The accident sequence started very shortly after takeoff, and something happened. Now, we've heard rumors, haven't we, that the aircraft was hit by lightning. I don't know. That doesn't sound all that possible that a lightning strike could cause this or be the lead event in all of this. But something happened to the airplane, and it caused the pilots to determine that they needed to come back to the airport pretty quickly. And then there will be a chain of events that happened after that. And we may see that all three of those, the environment, the flight crew, and some kind of mechanical thing, were all working in combination. We may see that. We don't know. We're speculating at this point. But something happened. That was either something like a lightning strike, which would bring the environment into play, or it was something mechanical. Like, I'll just give you an example.
Okay.
Purely speculative, but maybe an engine came apart. That could happen. Maybe some other failure internal in the flight systems stopped working and caused. Maybe it could have been something like a explosive device. We don't know. We don't know at this stage what it would be. But all of these things have to be brought into play. The investigators will be looking at the chain of events. What caused the airplane to have to turn around? Then how did the pilots perform in doing that? There was some speculation, I heard, that they had lost communication with the tower. That's supported a little bit because you can see that when the airplane came in for the landing, the fire trucks, for example, didn't seem to be positioned at the runway. So it almost seems like they didn't know it was coming, or they didn't know it was coming in on that runway because they never pre-positioned the fire trucks, that's for sure. You see the fire trucks racing across the tarmac to get to where the runway is. Well, if they had proper communications and everything had gone swimmingly, then those fire trucks would have been positioned up by the runway and could have fought that fire a lot earlier.
Of course, you see in the video quite clearly now that it didn't burst into flames until it made that initial touch, and then that was when the explosion occurred. When you look at, if we can bring up a little bit of video that we also got just this morning, which is the burned out fuselage. Do we glean any new information from looking at that at this early point, Mr. Vance?
That was video that was taken long after the event, when the fire had burned itself out or was put out by the firefighters. They knew it was coming. They should have been positioned. But anyway, the fact is that, or they should have known it was coming. The fact is that the dramatic burnout of the airplane occurred afterward. Now, obviously, inside the airplane would have been a horrific thing for those who were on board. It's typical of what accident
Yes.
a fire accident looks like. It's absolutely typical. Everything burns all up, and you have to work with what you have.
So the 33 people survived that. 41 passed away, most of whom were in the back end of that plane. The science tells us, and if you look at the data, that the middle seats at the rear of an aircraft have the highest survival rates. So this would seemingly fly in the face of that trend, if I could say that, or the historical trend. Is it just simply because there was such a fire involvement?
Yeah, it's the fire that changes that dynamic. Airplane accidents typically happen when the front end of the airplane runs into something, don't they? And the people who are sitting in the front are more vulnerable from that aspect, and the people in the back are less vulnerable. This happened, the fire happened from the midsection, if you will, toward the rear of the airplane, and certainly those people in the back would be susceptible to the fire more so than those in the front. I think the demarcation line is pretty dramatic when you see it on the video, where the people were in trouble and where they weren't.
Okay. One last question before I have to let you go. We've been covering so much lately, very unfortunate airline stories. The 737, the MAX 8 crashes, 2 of them. This crash yesterday, we had the plane skidding off the runway in Jacksonville over the weekend again. This tends to give the flying public pause, to say the least, worried about safety. What do we need to keep in mind?
Well, this is a cluster, isn't it? It's a cluster of accidents that have happened all in the same time frame, if you will, and it certainly gives people reason to pause. I think that what people have to realize is that these accidents, other than the 2 in the Boeing 737 MAX 8, are unrelated. They're all separate. They all have separate lead events. They all have separate chains of events. And I don't think that it represents anything serious happening in the aviation industry. I think people are very safe to get on board their airplane and go where they want to go. Okay.
Larry Vance, as always, we appreciate your expertise as we continue to cover the aftermath of this deadly Russian crash. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.